Hello and welcome back to Adult Bible Studies. I'm Wayne Williams and I'm glad to be with you today. I hope this will be a meaningful time for you as we study God's Word together. We're continuing on in a unit of lessons from the Cokesbury Adult Bible Study series this week. This is the second lesson in a series where we've been looking at ways that we can share our faith with people who identify with other faith groups. Last week we looked at Paul and we saw him in Athens, which was a very pluralistic pagan kind of atmosphere, and yet it was an atmosphere where there was openness to philosophy, to ideas, to being able to dialogue, and so Paul was able to take advantage of that ease of being heard, and he chose carefully how to approach the subject. He listened to the people and saw the things that were important to them, and he built on them. So he gives us a good example of how to engage people of other faith groups in the sense of listening to their beliefs, understanding where they're coming from, and then trying to build on what they believe, what they understand, to enhance our understanding or their understanding of the one true God. And Paul did a good job of that last week. This week, we're going back into the Old Testament and we're looking at a passage where, again, a person of a pagan faith is exposed to the God of Israel, the one true God. It's a beautiful story. And I want us to look together as we see this passage from 2 Kings, the 5th chapter, verses 1 through 19. This is a pretty long chapter, a pretty long section of Scripture, and so I'm going to break it down into smaller sections. First, we're going to look at verses 1 through 5. And here we're introduced to the main character, Naaman. It says, Naaman, a general of the king of Aram, was a great man and highly regarded by his master, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. This man was a mighty warrior, but he had a skin disease. Now, Armenian raiding parties had gone out and captured a young girl from the land of Israel. She served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, I wish that my master could come before the prophet who lives in Samaria. He would cure him of his skin disease. So Naaman went and told his master that what the young girl from the land of Israel had said. Then Aram's king said, Go ahead, I will send a letter to the Israel's king. This is the introduction to this story, and certainly it's a powerful introduction because a lot of very delicate, diplomatic as well as personal, exposing yourself personally to the idea of being rebuked and that sort of thing. Situations are taking place here. First, you have Naaman, the great general, the powerful warrior, the one who has really proven himself true to his king and who is thought very highly of by his king. He has a skin disorder. We're not told exactly what this is. It could have been something as severe as leprosy. It could have been something like psoriasis. Whatever it was, it seems that it was getting worse because he was certainly feeling a sense of the need to have this issue cleared up so that he could resume his duties and not have other people, some maybe withdraw from him because they saw this rash and weren't sure whether it was safe to interact with him, that sort of thing. It's something that was really causing him trouble. The next person that we see here is a young girl. The words that are used here, translated from the Hebrew, the lesson writer brings out that they're words that emphasize that this really was a young girl. She was probably not an adolescent, probably more like 10 to 12 years old. She had been taken in a battle as a slave and brought back to their land, and she was assigned to Naaman's wife as a servant. And here she is in that situation, serving her master faithfully, being the kind of person that she was taught to be and had been brought up to be, a a person who cares about other people, a person who cares about herself and wants to present herself in a good way, who does a good job of being a servant and is faithful. And because of that, she's able to get an audience with her mistress, and she's able to say to her, and the mistress is able to hear from her uh, this uh, idea of that there is a prophet in Samaria that could help her master, her mistress's husband, be healed. This young lady really stands out. She gets the spotlight on her today as we look at her as a person sharing their faith. Sometimes we really discount those little opportunities that we have to put in a word here or there to mention to somebody something that's going on at the church or a special speaker that's coming or things like that. We think, oh, they won't care. And yet sometimes it's those little things that catch people at just the right time and entice them into considering and exposing themselves to the idea of God and Jesus Christ and faith and salvation. And this young lady was just being true to herself, just being herself. She says, I care about you and I care about your husband, and I see that he's got this problem, and I know a way that he can be healed of that. And she shares that. And because of all the other elements that have been in place back within her relationship with her mistress, she was able to be heard. And the mistress was willing to take that report to her husband. And her husband, uh, hearing it because of his almost desperation, it seems like, he responded quickly and goes to the king and asks for permission to go to Israel. Now, this in itself is a pretty big deal because Syria and Israel were constantly battling back and forth with each other. That's how this young girl came to be a servant in Naaman's home, as they had a battle somewhere and she had been taken into slavery. And so it was not a good relationship. And so for him to go to his king and ask for permission to go to speak to the king of Israel could have really put him in a bad position. The king might have said, Naaman, I don't know what your intent is here, but this is our enemy, and you're asking to go speak to him. But the king, because he respected Naaman and because he valued him greatly, responded in an opposite sort of way. That's the second thing that we want to look at. If we look at the second part of verse 5, and we're going to go through verse 8. So Naaman left. He took along 10 kikars of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. He brought the letter to Israel's king, the letter that his king gave to him, a letter of introduction. It read, along with this letter, I'm sending you my servant Naaman, so you can cure him of his skin disease. When the king of Israel read the letter, he ripped his clothes. He said, what? Am I God to hand out death and life? But this king writes me asking me to cure someone of his skin disease. You must realize that he wants to start a fight with me. When Elisha, the man of God, heard that Israel's king had ripped his clothes, he sent word to the king, why did you rip your clothes? Let the man come to me. Then he'll know that there's a prophet in Israel. I like Elijah. He's such a cool dude. He says, why'd you do that, king? Why'd you go overreact like that? I'm here. I've got connections with God, and we're going to work this out. You don't have to get into all that kind of thing. So anyway, the king responds in a very human sort of way. He wants to say, oh, what's the ulterior motive here in Naaman coming? Here's this great general coming, and he's coming into my court. He's coming into our area. Is he coming just so that he can plant spies around and see what our fortifications are and see where our weaknesses are, and so they can prepare battle against us? And so he's really worried about the negative possibilities of all this, and that really has nothing to do with the situation. It's not Naaman's intent at all to be doing that. The king just jumps to conclusions. Isn't that the kind of thing that happens a lot in our world? We jump to conclusions, we assume the worst, and sometimes we make the worst happen because of our assumptions. When if we just would be patient, listen, be open to each other, even when there's some things that separate us from one another in the sense of being in complete dialogue with each other. Still, listening and giving each other the opportunity to share. And the king does uh, overreact to this, but Elisha steps in as the man of God that he is. And he says, "Don't worry, king, I got this." I like that. I like that idea. Don't worry, king, I got this. And Elisha says, "Just send Naaman over to my house and I'll talk to him." Well, that's the third act of this drama. And we want to see Naaman arrived with his horses and chariots. He brought all these things. He had armored men and horses and chariots. It was indeed a show of force, but it was also a show of response, acknowledging that they had a need and they were willing to pay for it. They weren't just coming in and trying to take Elisha captive. They came in and respected the king of Israel and the Israelites and were asking in an appropriate way. He arrived with his horses and chariots. He stopped at the door of Elisha's house. I like that too. It doesn't say he stopped at the foot of Elisha's throne in his great temple or great uh, sanctuary. He just stopped at Elisha's house. Elisha's house. Can you imagine a prophet's house? You think it would want to be one of these grand, sprawling things, a Donald Trump kind of house? Probably just very similar to the houses that everyone else lived in. Uh, Elisha sent out a messenger who said, "Go and wash 7 times in the Jordan River. Then your skin will be restored and become clean." Now, here's Naaman. He's a mighty man. He's a respected man. He's accustomed to people bowing before him and cowering to his authority and his power. And Elisha doesn't even come out and meet him face to face and eye to eye. Elisha just treats him like another person that needs some help, and he's giving him help. He's moving on. He's got other things to do, and Naaman's not what it's all about. And it probably got Naaman a little upset, just that, and the fact that he had to interact with a servant of Elisha rather than directly with Elisha. And then he's told to go to the Jordan River. And that in itself turns out to be something that's kind of a put down in the way that Naaman sees it. Boy, all kinds of conclusions, jump into conclusions here in this story, aren't they? Well, anyway, it says, but Naaman went away in anger. He said, "I thought for sure he'd come out, stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hands over me over the spot and cure the skin disease. I was expecting some fanfare. I was expecting something great and marvelous. I was expecting you know, a sideshow. I was expecting some drama. Uh, and yet none of that happened." Uh, he says, "Aren't the rivers in Damascus, the Abana and the Pharpar, better than all Israel's waters? Can't I wash in them and get clean?" So he turned away and proceeded to leave in anger, assuming that he knows better than assuming that he knows that he's been put down, assuming that he's been uh, given an affront to his power and authority. He got his feelings hurt. And when we get our feelings hurt, we burr up sometimes, don't we? Paul ran into that in Athens. Some of the people there got their feelings hurt. Others responded in faith. Naaman here gets his feelings hurt. But his servants come to him. Listen to this. Naaman's servants came up to him and spoke to him, "Our father." It's a term of acknowledgement of Naaman as a person in And I thought, our Father, if the prophet had told you to do something difficult, wouldn't you have done it? Wouldn't you have said yes if the prophet had said, "Go slay a dragon and bring its head back to me," and then I'll, if he ask you to do something magnificent and stupendous and that sort of thing, uh, wouldn't you have done that? But all he said to you was, "Wash and become clean," and it's because it was such a simple request and such a simple thing to comply with. You're taking it the wrong way. The prophet is empowered to do this, and he understands that your need, and he's responding to it. Listen to him. Allow him to help. Wash and become clean. So Naaman went down and bathed in the Jordan 7 times, just as the man of God had said. His skin was restored like that of a young boy, and he became clean. He returned to the man of God with all his attendants. He came and stood before Elisha, saying, "Now I know for certain there's no God anywhere on earth except in Israel. Please accept a gift from your servant." He had one of those aha moments, didn't he? He had an epiphany. He had a come to Jesus meeting. Yes, he received insight, and he understood that all these other gods that he had worshipped since his youth were not able to do this kind of a thing for him. But this God, the God of Israel, was indeed able to do it and had done it in grace and in love. And he responds to it. Please accept a gift from your servant. He has all this gold and silver and this fine garments and stuff that he has brought with him to pay for this service being provided for him. But Elijah said, "I swear by the life of the Lord I serve that I won't accept anything." Elisha said, "I don't want your gifts. I don't need your gifts." In short, he could have rubbed a little salt in the wound and said something like, "My God created this whole world. He owns everything. If I need anything, he'll take care of me. I don't need your stuff." But he didn't. He just basically said, "No, I don't. This is not about gifts. This is not payment for a service. This is about God's showing you that he is able to do for you that which you need done." Naaman urged Elisha to accept something, but he still refused. Then Naaman said, "If not, then let me, your servant, have 2 mule loads of earth." This is kind of a strange request in our eyes. And yet, in the pagan world, the gods were often limited to geographic areas. And so they were considered to be empowered in certain areas of land masses. And what Naaman is basically saying here is, let me take back enough dirt from this area that God will be able to visit with me where I am. Because he was still in his pagan thinking, thinking about the idea that God was limited by the ground which he was God over. Elisha doesn't seem to have made much of a response to that. He says, "Your servant will never again offer entirely burned offerings or sacrifices to any other gods except the Lord." He's making a profession of faith, and he's making a commitment to God. What a powerful story of faith coming to realization. "But may the Lord forgive your servant for one thing." He made one request of Elisha already. Let me take some of this ground back with me so that physically God can be with me in my homeland. But he asks the second thing. He says, "When my master comes into Rimon's temple to bow down there and is leaning on my arm, I must also bow down to Rimon's temple. When I bow down in Rimon's temple, may the Lord forgive your servant for doing that." Wow. Naaman really has had an epiphany, really has had a come to Jesus kind of, really has had a life life-changing experience. And he's thinking ahead. When I return, I'm going to have to resume my role of being the king's right-hand man, of being the general of his armies. And when he goes to worship, he's going to expect me to go with him, and he's going to expect me to go through the motions of worship with everyone else. And when I do that, it could appear to others that I'm turning against the God of Israel. Please, let God forgive me, or ask God to forgive me for having to do that for now until others come to know his faith. Elisha said to him, go in peace. Go in peace. When we know someone who has made a commitment to Christ, you don't just load them up with all kinds of shoulds and oughts and responsibilities. You let them grow in that faith. You let them experience that faith. You let that faith become real to them. And God's Spirit will work through that person and enable them to find ways to get around these things that are impasses. I have no doubt that Naaman, being the man that he was and in the position that he was in, and because of this great change in his personal perspective of God and what things were more important, that he had an influence on other people as well. But it started with a little slave girl, 10 to 12 years old. We think our children are not very wise, but sometimes they have the wisdom of the ages. And sometimes they have the opportunity to be heard, but we don't have it. Sometimes they have a way of saying things that make even us listen. Working for abiding peace means that I have this sense of openness, listening, and caring for one another. So the emphasis stays on not me, but on God. Not on my faith, but God's love and grace. And how you too work for that peace in the world around us. It comes by sensitivity to each other and reaching out to each other as children of God. Where others share our understanding of what it is at that moment. Being faithful, testing. God bless you this week ahead. I hope you can find peace with those you encounter this week who are not of a similar faith as you. Maybe even those who have no faith at all. And that you can find effective and powerful ways to share your faith. Plant the seeds come to bear fruit. God bless you.